Layla Washington never imagined her honeymoon in the historic French Quarter would end with her discovering her new husband lying motionless on the bedroom floor of their hotel suite, blood pooling across the dark wooden floor. Darius's white shirt was soaked crimson, 5 stab wounds on his chest, like 5 indictments of the secrets he took to his grave. Layla's scream echoed through the elegant hotel corridor, but no one could hear the true pain in her heart. The pain of someone who just discovered that the person she loved most was, in fact, a complete stranger. Layla Washington was accustomed to life in Magnolia, one of New Orleans' poorest neighborhoods. 25 years of living among dilapidated buildings, where each day passed like the one before, had taught her not to expect miracles. But the miracle happened. Darius Coleman, with his pearl-white smile and a manner as if he owned the world. Their first meeting took place at the Whole Foods supermarket, where Layla had been working as a cashier for 3 years. Darius approached her register with an expensive bottle of whiskey and a pack of cigarettes. He wasn't dressed like the local men. Instead of baggy jeans and graphic t-shirts, he wore a neat polo shirt and tailored slacks. "A pretty girl like you should work in a prettier place," he said, holding out a $100 bill. She was embarrassed, but managed to give him the correct change despite her trembling hands. He left his number on the receipt and walked away without waiting for a response. For 3 days, Layla stared at that number written in flowing handwriting. Her best friend, Monique Bennett, kept urging her to call. "Girl, don't let this one slip away," Monique insisted as they sat in Martha's cafe where she worked as a waitress. "I've seen guys like him come through the cafe. They don't usually notice girls from Magnolia." Layla didn't notice the odd gleam in Monique's eyes when she mentioned seeing Darius before. She was too focused on gathering courage to make the call. When Layla finally gathered the courage to call, things moved at an unbelievable pace. Dinners at restaurants she'd only heard of before, walks along the waterfront, jewelry she could never afford on her salary. Darius said he had a small business importing exotic fruit, and Layla didn't ask too many questions. Why would she, when she finally had a man in her life who made her feel like a princess? What made Layla uncomfortable was the way some people looked at Darius when they walked through New Orleans' wealthier neighborhoods. Suspicious glances, sometimes contemptuous, reserved for a well-dressed, successful black man. Several times over those first months, Layla noticed Monique watching them with an intensity that seemed strange. Once, she caught her friend and Darius exchanging a look that felt too familiar, but, when questioned, both brushed it off as nothing. The marriage proposal came 8 months into their relationship. It happened in a small restaurant overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, a small diamond ring presented on a dessert plate that made Layla burst into tears of happiness. Monique helped organize the wedding, though Layla sometimes noticed something akin to envy in her eyes. But who wouldn't be jealous of such happiness? The wedding was modest. Layla had almost no relatives left, and Darius said his family was scattered across the country and couldn't attend. They signed at City Hall and then had a small reception at the cafe where Monique worked. Among the guests was Andre Thomas, whom Darius introduced as his business partner. The tall man with the hard stare seemed strange to Layla. He hardly smiled and was always whispering something with her new husband. "I have a surprise for you," Darius said the morning after the wedding. He handed her an envelope with reservations for the Crescent Moon Hotel in the French Quarter, the luxurious historic district of New Orleans, just a few miles from Magnolia, but worlds apart in terms of wealth and ambiance. "Honeymoon, baby! A week in paradise!" Layla screamed with delight and threw her arms around his neck. Though they lived in the same city, a stay in the upscale French Quarter hotels was something she'd never imagined she could afford. She didn't take long to pack: a new suitcase, bathing suits, summer dresses, a wide-brimmed hat. Layla prepared for the trip, as if it were the most important event in her life. Monique helped her choose her outfits, though she was becoming increasingly quiet. "Is everything okay?" Layla asked one day, noticing her friend staring wistfully out the window. "Yeah, just a little jealous. You're so lucky to have Darius. There aren't men like that anymore." Oh, Layla hugged her friend and said, "Your prince will be found too. In the meantime, I'll bring you a magnet from the French Quarter." They laughed, but Layla thought Monique's laughter sounded a little forced. A taxi took them to the Crescent Moon Hotel, a small but elegant hotel in the French Quarter. Their room was on the 3rd floor and had a balcony overlooking the historic, vibrant street. "God, it's like a dream," Layla whispered, looking out at the cobblestone street with its ornate iron balconies. Darius hugged her from behind. "Just the beginning, baby." The first 2 days of their honeymoon were perfect. They toured the French Quarter, enjoyed local cuisine at roadside restaurants, and made love to the sound of jazz floating through the open windows. Layla felt that she finally had what she had always dreamed of: love, care, and a chance to see the world beyond her neighborhood. What bothered her were the looks from some other guests at the pool, wealthy white couples eyeing her as if she didn't belong there. One woman even pulled her daughter out of the pool when Layla got in. Small injuries she was used to enduring, but they still hurt. On the third day, something changed. Darius received a call during breakfast and went out to talk. He returned with a tense face. "Everything okay?" Layla asked, handing him a cup of coffee. "Yeah, just a business call. Looks like I'll have to be away for a couple of hours today. Problem with a supplier here, in New Orleans." "That's odd, but business doesn't wait, I suppose. You won't be gone long, will you?" Layla nodded, though there was an unpleasant feeling inside. A honeymoon should be just for the two of them, shouldn't it? But she didn't want to ruin the vacation with an argument. Darius left after breakfast, dressed too formally for a beach vacation in slacks and a long-sleeve shirt. Layla wandered alone through the historic streets, feeling a bit lonely among the other couples. However, Darius did return for lunch as promised, and they spent the rest of the day together. On the fourth day, the situation repeated itself, and on the fifth. Each time Darius left for a few hours, returned a little nervous, but quickly composed himself and became a caring husband again. Layla began to worry. What kind of business did he have in New Orleans? Why didn't he ever talk about it in detail? But every time she tried to broach the subject, Darius steered the conversation in another direction, or said he didn't want to bore her with business matters. The sixth day of their honeymoon began as usual with breakfast on the balcony. Darius was pensive, constantly checking his phone. "Going out again today?" Layla asked, spreading jam on her toast. "Yes, baby. One last meeting, I promise, and then it's just you and me for the rest of the trip." Layla sighed. "Why don't I come with you? See what you're up to." Darius's face froze for a moment, but he quickly smiled. "It's boring business negotiations. You won't like it. Better go for a swim in the pool. I saw you looking at it." After he left, Layla did indeed head to the pool. Swimming in the cool water, she reflected on her marriage. She knew so little about her husband, not his parents, not his childhood friends, not even his exact place of employment. All she had was a beautiful fairy tale about a man who had magically appeared in her life and turned it around. The environment around the pool only added to her discomfort. Several wealthy white guests gave her sidelong glances, as if questioning her presence in this exclusive setting. When she entered the water, a woman quickly ushered her young daughter out, making a barely disguised comment about maintaining standards. Layla pretended not to hear. She was used to such microaggressions, though they still stung. Returning to the room around 3 in the afternoon, Layla found that Darius was still gone. She took a shower, changed her clothes, and decided to take a nap. The sun and humid air had exhausted her. She awoke to a strange sensation. The room was too quiet. "Darius," she called out, but there was no answer. Layla got out of bed and walked to the living room portion of the suite. No one was there. She peeked into the bathroom. Empty. Perhaps he had come back and left again while she slept. Strange, he usually always left a note. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed her husband's number. The dial tone went on, but no one answered. Suddenly, Layla heard a muffled ringtone coming from somewhere in the room. She followed the sound and found that it was coming from the bedroom closet. Layla's heart beat faster. Something was not right. She slowly opened the closet door and screamed. There on the bedroom floor, half hidden behind the closet door, lay Darius. His white shirt was soaked with blood, and several knife wounds gaped on his chest. His eyes, once full of life and cunning, now stared glassy-eyed at the ceiling. Layla didn't remember how she ran out into the hallway, how she screamed, how the hotel staff came running and called the police. Everything merged into one nightmarish kaleidoscope. The flashing lights of police cars, the uniformed men photographing her husband's body, the questions, the endless questions to which she had no answers. "Mrs. Coleman, did you see anyone near your room?" "No." "Did your husband have any enemies?" "I don't know." "What did he do here in New Orleans?" Business, something to do with importing fruit. The young New Orleans police officer with a serious face made a note in his notebook and sighed. Detective Michael Sullivan was sitting at a desk littered with files and documents when he was informed of a new case. The 42-year-old officer with 15 years of experience in the New Orleans Police Department's Homicide Division was used to violent crimes, but the death of a newlywed while honeymooning in the French Quarter still sounded unusual, even by the standards of his extensive practice. Darius Coleman, 30 years old, stabbed to death in a hotel room in the French Quarter, Sullivan pronounced, reviewing the preliminary report. His wife found the body. French Quarter police are turning the case over to us because they believe the roots of the crime are here in Magnolia. Sullivan's partner, Officer Carter Ramirez, leaned back in his chair. What makes them think that? They have reason to believe Coleman was more than just a tourist. They found his cell phone with messages indicating a meeting with some kind of supplier. Given the specific nature of New Orleans as a transshipment point for drug trafficking. I see, Ramirez nodded. Another dealer who ran into trouble. What about the wife? She's not involved according to preliminary reports. Layla Washington, 25, works as a supermarket cashier. Clean record, no priors, probably didn't know about her husband's affairs. Detective Sullivan rubbed his chin. His methods were well known in the department. He never jumped to conclusions, scrutinized every detail, and had a special talent for spotting inconsistencies in testimony. Colleagues called him the lie detector man. Let's talk to the widow, Sullivan decided, rising. Is she back in New Orleans yet? Returned yesterday along with her husband's body, now at a friend's house in Magnolia. The Magnolia neighborhood wasn't the cops' favorite place to be. High crime rates, dilapidated buildings, and a general air of hopelessness made it one of New Orleans' most disadvantaged neighborhoods. Sullivan's car stood out from the shabby cars of the locals, attracting wary glances. The house where Layla was staying was a typical apartment building, with peeling paint and bars on the first-floor windows. Sullivan went up to the third floor and knocked on the door numbered 312. A young black woman with tired eyes opened it. Yes? Detective Michael Sullivan, New Orleans PD. He introduced himself, showing his badge. I need to speak to Layla Washington. The woman nodded. I'm Monique Bennett, Layla's friend. She's not in the best of health. I understand, but this is important. We're investigating her husband's death. Monique reluctantly let the detective into the small apartment. In the living room, a frail figure sat on the sofa. Layla Washington, dressed in black, eyes swollen with tears. Mrs. Coleman, Sullivan addressed her, I am Detective Michael Sullivan. I'm sorry for your loss. May I ask you a few questions? Layla nodded slowly without raising her eyes. Monique sat down beside her, taking her friend's hand. Tell me about your husband, Sullivan began. What did he do? He had a business importing exotic fruits, Layla answered quietly. At least, that's what he said. Where was his office located? Layla faltered. I don't know exactly. He never invited me there. Said it was a boring place. Sullivan made a note in his notebook and privately noted the similarity to previous drug cases. A particular detail caught his attention. On the apartment wall was a photo of Layla and Monique, taken years ago when they were teenagers, standing beside a large pit bull. This gave Sullivan an idea. Which of his co-workers or partners do you know? Just Andre Thomas. He was at our wedding. Darius introduced him as a business partner. Who else did your husband surround himself with? Friends? Relatives? Layla shook her head. He hardly had any friends. He said his parents were dead, and he didn't socialize with the rest of his relatives. The further the conversation went, the more Sullivan realized that he was facing a classic case. A woman who had no idea who her husband really was. A story repeated hundreds of times in his practice. Mrs. Coleman, let me ask you a direct question, Sullivan said after a series of qualifying details. Did you ever suspect that your husband might be involved with drugs? Layla flinched, and Monique squeezed her hand tighter. No, never, she replied in a trembling voice. What are you talking about? The French Quarter police have reason to believe your husband wasn't just there for a vacation. They found messages on his phone about a meeting with a supplier. That's a mistake. He was in the fruit business. Perhaps it was a fruit supplier. Sullivan sighed. He hated this part of the job, shattering illusions, showing people the brutal truth, but it was necessary. Mrs. Coleman, we've checked. There is no registered fruit import company associated with your husband. But his name has come up in several drug distribution investigations, though no direct charges have been made. Layla covered her face with her hands. Monique put her arm around her shoulders, casting the detective a judgmental look. You should have prepared her, she hissed. She just lost her husband. Better the bitter truth now than unpleasant surprises later, Sullivan replied. Mrs. Coleman, I need to know all about your husband's last days in the French Quarter. Where did he go? Who was he meeting with? Through tears, Layla recounted Darius's strange behavior in recent days, his mysterious absences, and unwillingness to explain where he was going. I should have known, she whispered. I should have realized something was wrong. After a 2-hour conversation, Detective Sullivan left Monique's apartment with a notebook full of notes and a growing list of questions. He needed to find Andre Thomas, the only known business partner of the murdered man. That wasn't proving to be so difficult. Andre Thomas had a criminal record for drug possession and assault, served 3 years, and had been released 2 years ago. He was now officially working at an auto repair shop in New Orleans' Industrial District. Sullivan found him repairing an old Ford. Thomas, seeing the detective's badge, wasn't even surprised. I knew you'd come, he said, wiping his hands with a rag. As soon as I heard about Darius. How did you hear about his death? News travels fast, especially bad news. They settled into the small break room of the machine shop. Andre was tense but held himself with confidence. You were Coleman's business partner, Sullivan began. Tell me about your business. Andre grinned. Why the games, detective? You already know everything. Darius pushed the merchandise. I helped with the logistics sometimes. Drugs, call it whatever you want. We preferred the term pharmaceuticals. And how big was your pharmaceutical business? Andre shrugged. Not really big time. Worked mostly with marijuana, sometimes cocaine. Darius was smart, never shined, always operated through middlemen. That's why the cops couldn't catch him. And the trip to the French Quarter? Business. Wanted to set up a direct supply line, bypassing the extra people. He had a meeting there with a Texan who controls some of the shipping lanes. And you didn't go with him? It was his honeymoon, Andre hummed. He took his wife with him as a cover. Smart, huh? Who would suspect a drug dealer on a honeymoon trip? Sullivan watched Thomas's reactions carefully. He spoke freely, as if he had no fear of repercussions. Where were you the day Coleman was killed? Here in the workshop. 5 people can confirm it, including the boss. I haven't left here in 2 weeks. Coleman had enemies? Andre laughed. Detective, in our business, we all have enemies. But if you're asking if I know who killed him, no, I don't. Maybe a deal went bad. Maybe someone decided he thought too much of himself. What about his wife? Did she know about his affairs? Layla? Andre shook his head. Nope, she was like a trophy, a nice girl from a poor neighborhood to show off to his friends. Look, I'm a real businessman. I have a beautiful wife. He kept her completely in the dark. Sullivan noticed something odd in the way Andre spoke about Layla. A bit of jealousy, perhaps, or bitterness. He made a note to check this relationship more carefully. After talking to Andre, Detective Sullivan went back to the station and made a preliminary report. The picture was beginning to emerge. Darius Coleman, a small-time drug dealer who was trying to move up the ranks, had been killed during a business meeting in the French Quarter. Most likely the deal had gone badly wrong. But something was bugging Sullivan. Something in the witness statements didn't add up. He decided to use an additional resource. Ramirez, I want to bring Ranger into this case, Sullivan said to his colleague as they reviewed the file. The drug-sniffing dog? You think there are drugs in Washington's apartment? No, but I saw a photo of a dog in their apartment. Made me think that using Ranger might help. He's trained to detect drugs, and he's also exceptionally good at reading human behavior. Dogs can sense anxiety, fear, deception. Might give us an edge when we interview witnesses again. Ramirez nodded, understanding Sullivan's approach. Ranger had proven valuable in previous investigations, not just for finding narcotics, but for his uncanny ability to react to subtle changes in human behavior that officers might miss. Sullivan decided to talk to the widow again the next day. This time, he came with Ranger, a black German shepherd trained for police work. This time, Layla looked more composed, though, still depressed. She sat in the kitchen of Monique's apartment, slowly stirring her tea. I spoke to Andre Thomas, the detective said. settling in across from her. He confirmed that your husband was involved in drug distribution. Layla nodded. I've been thinking about it all night, remembering little things. His unexpected absences, the phone calls he answered in the other room, the money that would appear out of nowhere. She paused, looking down at her tea. I should have asked more questions. People like Darius become very good at compartmentalizing their lives, Sullivan said. It wasn't your fault. I should have known. No one from Magnolia makes that much money the honest way. At that moment, Monique entered the kitchen with a tray of cookies. Ranger's ears perked up, his attention immediately fixed on Monique, though he remained seated beside Sullivan. Don't beat yourself up, she said to her friend. Darius was a good actor. He fooled everyone. Sullivan looked at Monique carefully, noticing how Ranger's ears perked up when Monique spoke about Darius. Mrs. Coleman, Sullivan continued, I'd like to clarify some details of your stay in the French Quarter. On the day of the murder, when you returned to the room and found your husband's body, was the door locked? Layla frowned, trying to remember. Yes, I think it was. I opened it with my key card. And when you left the room, was your husband there? No, he left earlier. Said he had an important meeting. And you didn't see anyone suspicious near the room or in the hotel? No, although... Layla suddenly froze. Ranger sat up straight, ears alert, sensing the change in her mood. There was one oddity. When I was coming back from the beach, I thought I saw a familiar figure in the hotel lobby. But it was a moment. I didn't pay much attention. A familiar figure? Sullivan was wary. Yes. Someone who reminded me of... Layla shook her head. No, that's nonsense. I imagined it. The detective made a note in his notebook. Nothing is inconsequential in a murder investigation. Who could you have seen? Layla glanced at Monique, who was straining to listen to the conversation. Ranger also turned to look at Monique, giving a soft growl. I don't know, really. Just a silhouette that seemed familiar. Maybe it was one of the vacationers I've seen on the beach before. Sullivan nodded but noted Layla's strange hesitation. Something was holding her back from a direct answer. Okay, one more question. Andre mentioned that Darius was planning a meeting with a Texan supplier. Did he ever mention his name? No, never. He didn't talk about his business associates. Sullivan stood up, putting the notebook away. Thank you for your help. I'll let you know if there's any news on the investigation. When he was already at the door, Monique caught up with him. Detective, Layla isn't guilty of anything. She's the victim in this story. I know that, Miss Bennett, Sullivan replied, noticing how Ranger continued to stare at Monique. But the killer is still at large, and it's my job to find them. Exiting the building, Detective Sullivan stopped in front of his car, patting Ranger's head appreciatively. You sensed something, didn't you? He murmured to the dog. Something's off with Miss Bennett. Something about this case kept him on his toes. If the room door was locked and only Layla and Darius had keys, how had the killer gotten in? And why had Layla faltered when she talked about a familiar figure in the hotel? He pulled out his cell phone and dialed his contact at the French Quarter Police Department. Officer Johnson, this is Detective Sullivan from New Orleans. I need more information on the Coleman case. Please check the hotel security footage from the day of the murder. Pay particular attention to the third-floor lobby and corridor. It had been a week since Detective Michael Sullivan had started investigating the murder of Darius Coleman. He was sitting in his office studying crime scene photos when the phone rang. Detective Sullivan, this is Officer Johnson from the French Quarter Precinct. We've checked the security footage as you requested. Sullivan straightened in his chair. And what did you find? Something interesting. On the day of the murder, about 2 hours before the estimated time of death, a woman entered the hotel. She was wearing sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, but when she turned toward one of the cameras, we were able to get a partial image of her face. Did you identify her? No, but she wasn't registered at the hotel. And here's the best part. A camera in the third-floor hallway captured her walking up to the Coleman suite. She knocks, they open the door, and she goes inside. Sullivan frowned. Who opened the door for her? Darius Coleman. The timing coincides. His wife was at the beach at the time, as she testified. And when did the woman leave the room? Here's the problem. She didn't come out. At least the cameras didn't capture that. There's a blind spot at the end of the hallway near the stairs. She probably left through it. Sullivan rubbed his chin. Send me the footage of this woman. Also, Check all hotel records and cab company logs. See if anyone matches her description leaving the hotel around that time. After the call, the detective opened the witness file. Layla Washington said she saw a familiar figure in the hotel lobby. Who would she recognize in the French Quarter other than her husband? Had someone from their neighborhood followed the couple to the luxury hotel? By late afternoon, he'd gotten the photos from the French Quarter police. The quality wasn't the best, but one of the shots did show a woman in a wide-brimmed hat and dark glasses. She was carefully looking away from the cameras, but at one point, she turned around, and part of her face was in the frame. It wasn't enough for a reliable identification, but Sullivan still printed out the photo. He also requested cell phone records for both Monique and Darius. Something about their interaction had felt off from the beginning, and Ranger's reaction to Monique had only strengthened his suspicions. The next day, he went to Martha's cafe, where Monique worked. She was wiping down the counter when Sullivan stepped inside. When she saw the detective, she tensed. "What brings you here?" she asked as Sullivan sat down at the counter. "Wanted to ask some questions about Darius Coleman," he replied, watching her reaction carefully. Monique shrugged her shoulders. "I've already told you everything. He was my friend's husband. Now we know he was a drug dealer. What else?" "What kind of relationship did you have with him?" "I told you, none. He was Layla's husband, that's all." "That's odd," Sullivan said thoughtfully. "Because I checked Coleman's phone records for the last 6 months. You've called him 37 times. That's a lot for a man with whom you have no relationship." Monique turned pale but quickly composed herself. "We were discussing Layla's birthday present. He wanted to surprise her. 37 calls in 6 months to discuss a gift?" "Look, detective," Monique lowered her voice. "I didn't want to say in front of Layla, but Darius, he tried to sell me drugs. I refused, but he was persistent." Sullivan studied her silently, not showing whether he believed her or not. "Were you at the Crescent Moon Hotel in the French Quarter on the day Darius was killed?" "No," she answered too quickly. "I can't afford to stay at places like that." "That's interesting, because security cameras captured a woman who looks remarkably like you entering the hotel on the day of the murder, and I have records showing a payment from your credit card to a taxi service that picked up and dropped off a passenger at that hotel at the times that coincide with our timeline." "You can't prove it was me," Monique raised her voice, drawing the attention of the other cafe patrons. "I believe we can," Sullivan replied calmly. "Forensics will compare the image from the camera to your photograph. We're also checking all your financial records to establish a complete timeline of your movements that day." Monique lowered her eyes. "I want to talk to a lawyer." "That's your right." Back at the station, Sullivan reviewed all the evidence. The cell phone records confirmed that Darius and Monique had been in frequent contact for months, long before and after his relationship with Layla began. He also obtained Monique's credit card records and found charges for a taxi service to and from the Crescent Moon Hotel on the day of the murder. At the same time, he began digging deeper into the backgrounds of everyone involved in this story. It turned out that Monique and Layla were indeed childhood friends, but their relationship was not always serene. In high school, there was a serious conflict between them over a guy who preferred Layla. The girls did not communicate for almost a year until they made up after graduation. Even more interesting was the information about the first meeting of Layla and Darius. According to Layla, they met at the supermarket where she worked, but Sullivan discovered through witness interviews that Darius had been frequenting Martha's cafe for weeks before that chance meeting, always sitting in Monique's section. This cast serious doubt on the coincidental nature of his meeting with Layla. Layla looked confused when the detective showed her the documents proving Monique's trip to the Crescent Moon Hotel. "This can't be true," she whispered. "Why would Monique go there during our honeymoon?" "I believe she had a personal interest in your husband," Sullivan replied. "The telephone calls, the secret visit to the hotel, everything indicates that there was something going on between them." Layla shook her head. "No, Monique couldn't have. She's my best friend. Mrs. Coleman, people aren't always what they seem. You've already seen that with your husband." Layla suddenly froze, as if remembering something. "Yesterday, Monique said the strangest thing. We were talking about Darius, and she said, 'He promised me.' But she cut herself off mid-sentence and changed the subject. I didn't think much of it at the time. What exactly did he promise her? I don't know. She didn't finish her thought." At that moment, the front door opened and Monique entered the apartment. Seeing the detective, she stopped. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes darting from Sullivan to Layla. "Monique," Layla said quietly, "why did you go to our hotel during our honeymoon?" Monique's face contorted with shock. "Who told you that?" "Just the facts, Miss Bennett," Sullivan replied calmly. "You were at the Crescent Moon Hotel on the day of the murder. You went to the Coleman suite. The security cameras recorded it." Monique threw the detective a hateful glare. "What did you tell her?" "Miss Bennett, we have enough evidence to arrest you on suspicion of murder. I suggest that you come with me voluntarily to the station and give a statement." Instead of answering, Monique rushed to the kitchen table and grabbed a knife. "No one is going anywhere." Sullivan instantly reached for his weapon. "Put the knife down, Miss Bennett." "Monique, please," Layla pleaded. "What are you doing?" "You never understood," Monique hissed, clutching the knife. "Always you, always Layla. Beautiful, special Layla. All the guys choose you, always. And I'm just a shadow, just a loyal friend." "What are you talking about?" "About Darius!" Monique shouted. "I met him first. I brought him to that supermarket. I arranged your chance meeting. He was supposed to be mine." "Monique," Layla stepped forward. "Please, we've always been like sisters. Don't make this any worse." For a moment, the former warmth flashed in Monique's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by coldness. "Sisters, you were always the one who got everything easily. Beauty, attention, love, and me. I was always in the background, always." She raised the knife and lunged at Layla. Sullivan reacted instantly, lunging forward and knocking Monique to the ground. The knife fell out of her hand and clattered across the floor. The detective quickly flipped the woman onto her stomach and handcuffed her. "Monique Bennett, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Darius Coleman. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Layla stood with her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks.